Hey everyone, so sorry about everything that happened yesterday. There was just a bunch of bugs that were happening with my emulator, and then after that, we also had another issue that had to be solved by actually adding a little bit of the Flutter boilerplate code, and you'll all have to be doing that as well if you have a new Java version like I did. And it has something to do with something that's wrong on Google's end, but it's a really simple fix. I already fixed it for you. You guys will just have to use git pull when it comes time to fixing that at the very beginning. So real quick, I wanted to show you the actual app that we'll be building as on the emulator. So this is what the home screen will look like. It looks really nice. I ended up changing all the fonts and stuff too in the end. And then we also have this little horizontal scrollable bar right here. And each of these countries are actually clickable. If I click on it, we'll have a little bit of loading that'll happen, and then we'll get some information from an API actually. And then from there, we get some information about, the Netherlands, and we'll see like a travel advisory, the currency that you use in that country, languages, some of its neighboring countries as well. And all this comes from an API, and then also each of these countries are clickable, and you can just keep going as well. Not only that, but we'll also create a little explore button that shows up to a little scrollable page. And not only that, but we can actually search through all the countries that we have on this app. And as we continue to type, you'll see that it continually gets updated. So if I search Canada, you'll see that the choices keep getting more and more narrow. So that's just a really cool thing that we'll be building, and I hope you guys are really excited for it, because this is a great project. Not only if you haven't done any projects before, this will help you a lot because it'll teach you just how to manage files and then how to modularize your code, and we'll go all over all that stuff, and it'll make you a better coder overall. So let me just exit this app. And the really cool thing about using emulators too is that after you're done using an app and you're like closed out of all of your code and stuff, you're actually a copy of your project, the last saved version or the last built version is still on the emulator, and you can actually select it. And that also works on your physical phone too. If you decide to develop on that, you'll have a physical version of your app on your phone as well that you can show to people after you're done. So I'm going to pick it up just exactly where we had left off last time. So if you go ahead and look at the description of this live stream, you should be able to see a link to a GitHub repository that says GitHub repo for today's lesson. So if you click on that link, it should take you to this repo right here. If you did this last time, then just sit tight. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So once you pull this up, we're going to be pulling this GitHub repo. Basically, it's the same thing that you would have on a typical Flutter project as soon as you start it up. But we also included a few assets folder with some pictures and some fonts as well. And then also a few files in the lib folder just to help us out. So go ahead and click on this green button that says code, and you should select HTTPS and click on this clipboard right here to copy it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up VS Code. So I'm just going to go ahead and type VS Code, and we'll open up a new window. And we'll be using VS Code for all of our coding in this workshop as well, and for developing this app. So let me make this text a little bit bigger for everyone. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this option that says clone repository on this welcome page. If this doesn't show up, you can also go to view and then command palette, and you should just type in git and then clone, and you should also be able to click on that as well. After that, you can just paste that link that we just got, and then click enter. And then I'll ask you where you want to put this GitHub repository. So I'm going to put it where I put all of my Flutter projects right here. And I'm just going to click on select this folder for the repository. It's going to ask if you want to open the clone repository. I'm going to select open as well. And then we have all of our files now here. So if you already did this last time, then you do have to do one quick thing, which is to go ahead and run git pull, because I did make a small edit in the Android files because there was an issue with one of the services that Flutter uses, which is called the Gradle, with the new Java version. All you have to do is just run git and then pull, and then for me it's already up to date, so it won't do anything, but for you it'll just edit one file. Go ahead and X this out. So we're getting a lot of errors showing up, but that's just typical. It'll take a little bit of time before they go away. So the very next thing that we want to do is also go ahead and go into your pubspec.yaml and click on Get Packages, because we'll want to update everything real quick. So currently all of our code is analyzing. As you can see, the errors are starting to go away. So this main.dart file is where you want to go, and it's located in your lib folder, and then you just click on main.dart. And then after you do that, we're going to want to start up our emulator, because that takes a little bit of time, especially if you haven't done it before. So go ahead, and I have it pulled up right now, but if you don't worry, it'll pull up as soon as you click on the control and then F5 basically on your keyboard. And when that happens, it'll open up your debug console and it'll say launching main.dart on your Android SDK, which is the Android emulator we have pulled up. And if it wasn't already pulled up, it should come up after some time and then should launch. So while that's happening, we can go ahead and take a look at some of these files that we have here. So I'm going to minimize this real quick. So while it's pulling up on my emulator. So if we take a look at some of the files that we have in the lib, there's two folders that would not come typically as soon as you create a new Flutter project, and that is the data and the models. So the data, all it is just a giant map, which is just key value pairs of a country's two-letter code, and that's what they're specific codes that the UN has decided for each country's full name, and that'll just help us with our PNGs. Because if we go ahead and open up this assets folder, and we open up flags, you'll see that all of these are just two-letter PNG names basically for each of the country's flags. So that'll help us displaying those later on. And then the second thing is this model, and we'll use this when it comes time to using the API, as long as we get to it. My goal is to go through as much of this as possible, and if there's any that's left over, you will have the screenshots available to kind of work on it on your own, along with the final code repository, so you can check your work afterwards too. So we'll go ahead and X this out. Let's go ahead and look at what's going on with our debug console. Used by Gradle. Okay, let's see what's up. It's probably just the same exact issue as before. Seems to be that Gradle is having a lot of issues, but I do have another version of this on my own computer, the boilerplate, so I'll just work directly in there instead, as I know that this should work for sure. If you're having any issues on your end, definitely give it a Google, whatever's showing up in your debug console, and pause this video, and it should work after that. So let me launch it on my own version as well, and this should be fine. Yep, here we go. It's a little strange, I know. If you're having issues on your end, then it's definitely has to do with probably the code. I'll of course play around with it afterwards and make sure that everything's good and let you guys get pull if there's anything wrong. But as long as everything's working on your end, then we should be good to go. Again, if you do have any errors in your debug console, just simply copy exactly what's there and post into a Google search, and you will find lots of helpful articles that will tell you exactly how to fix it. So let's go ahead and get started now that we have it pulled up. And this is just the basic thing that shows up as soon as you start a new Flutter project, and it's just a simple clicking button or a simple incrementing button. So everything that you see there, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see a little bit more. I'm basically going to delete everything that's here all the way to the top. You can start off by highlighting that, but then we're going to delete up to about line 32 basically. So everything except for this top little portion right here. And then after that, I'm also going to delete basically everything above here, the theme data, the title, all of that. And also we might as well delete visual, this part right here, and the visual density. And then all we're left with is just this home property right here in the material app. So the material app is basically the root of your entire project that we'll be working on. And you would include that every single, or it would be there as soon as you start a new Flutter project. So you don't ever have to worry about typing out material app or any of that stuff we saw earlier. But what we care about is this home property right here that is a part of material app. So this home property is basically what do we want to display on our home page, or as soon as the app basically launches. Before it was set to this widget called My Home Page that was below, but we just deleted that. But for now, just to make sure we have something displaying, we're going to go ahead and start making something basically. And what we're going to have is starting off with our root widget. So the basic root widget that you should typically have for every single screen you make is going to be called scaffold. So let me make this a bit bigger. And it's called scaffold. And basically that's just a really basic widget that just covers your entire screen basically. And it has a few things like app bar and a few other really great use cases as well. So including this floating action button at the bottom. So after we make the scaffold, let's go ahead and first take a peek at a screenshot of our app that we're going to be making. So this is a really great way of developing Flutter apps basically, is that you first create some sort of mock-up designing just so we can get an idea and we can break down what we're looking at. So our first goal is to make this sort of home screen right here that will show up as soon as we open the app. So to break down what we're looking at, first we see that we have this picture at the top with some text on top of it. And then underneath that we have a row of 3 different pieces of data: countries visited, what we want to visit, and then the total number of countries and some number, then a little divider, and then some recent searches and a scrollable, horizontal scrollable, like recent searches area, and then an explore button at the very bottom. So it's easiest to go top to bottom. So the first thing we can kind of see from this home page in terms of how we're going to build it is that we know we're going to organize everything in a column, right? We have this picture that's going to go on top, then this section right here that's going to go underneath that, then this section that's going to go underneath that. So we should see that we're going top to bottom, right? So anytime you're organizing stuff top to bottom in an app, we're always going to use the column widget. So what we're going to have for the scaffold, so the scaffold has 2 parts that are typically used, which is an app bar, which is this top bar at the very top of our emulator right now. And then you also have its body. So we're going to change its body right now. So this is property. And the body is basically everything that goes in this space, or just the whole page if there's no app bar basically. So we're going to go ahead and make a column right now. And then we're going to open up these parentheses for the column. So if you recall, a column has a few different useful properties: how it's being aligned, how much spacing between each of its children, and then both horizontally and vertically, and then also its children property right here, which is just a list of widgets. And if you recall, everything in Flutter is a widget. This scaffold is a widget. This column right here is a widget. Everything that you could possibly think of that's in green basically is a widget, and that's just the building blocks of your app. So the next property we're going to use is the children property. And the children property is basically what's going in this column from top to bottom. And that's how you order them as well. And all it is that you just put them between 2 brackets as well. So at the very top, if we look at our image, our screenshot right here again, we see that we start off with a picture. So how do we put in an image in Flutter? Well, if we go ahead and look at assets, we see that we actually have this picture already here. It's called the travel_home.png. So if to bring this into our app, all we have to do is there's actually a widget for that, for bringing images into our app, and it's called, as you might have guessed, image, and that's all you have to do. Now there's a bunch of different things that show up here. We have just a normal image with some parentheses, and then we can use that along with one that says image.asset, image.file, and a bunch of others. So the one I'm going to just use, just for simplicity, I'm just going to use image. I'm going to open up this. Just notice that we get some yellow warning basically. And the warning, if we open up our problems, it says the parameter image is required. So if we go ahead and minimize this, let me X this out real quick. It's expecting us to give something called, or to specify the property image. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down. And if we hover over that, and that's the great thing about VS Code and plenty of other IDEs, is that when you hover over something, it tells you what it expects, or for these properties. It's expecting an image provider dynamic. So it sounds really complex, but all we really have to put down is asset image, and all this takes in is just a string with the path to the asset, basically, that we're trying to put on the screen, basically. So if we look at the file path, if we break it down, so the file path starts from the very root of this project, right? So for those of you who haven't taken a class that you learn about file paths, all they are is just you go folder by folder and you use backslashes, basically. So starting with some single quotes, basically, I'm going to put my entire file path in here. So to get to this image, first we have to go to the assets folder. So I'm going to say assets and then backslash, right? Because now we're going to go into this folder. And then after that, we're already at our image because it's directly inside the assets folder. So then we just type out what we see here, which is travel_home.png. So I'm going to go ahead and type in travel_home.png. So now after doing all this, if I save this and then it performs this hot reload, you should see it come up. Sometimes you might, especially whenever you're using images, you might have to do a quick little refresh. Interesting. Doesn't seem to want to come up. Well, for now, we'll continue moving on. I'm sure it'll come up eventually, but that's definitely how it will eventually come up. Typically, that doesn't happen. So let's move on to going on to the next part of this app. So the next part is this visits column, right? So we have a couple of different pieces of data that we want to include, right? And what you might notice is this is kind of repetitive right here, right? We see that we have a title and then some number, a title, and then some number, and then a title and some number. And it's basically three things being repeated over and over again. And that's really helpful to notice because that actually makes it a lot easier to modularize your code, because then you know that what we're working on is going to have to go in its own little piece. So what we're going to go ahead and start off with is going into a new file, basically. And let's go ahead and start breaking down this app a little bit, just so it doesn't look so complicated. And we can do that by creating a few new folders. So a typical Flutter way for organizing all your files in a Flutter project is to create a few different folders. One of them includes a screens folder. And basically, for every screen that you have in your app, you want to have its own little file, basically. So let's first off, we're going to create a home folder inside this, because we're going to need to create a home page, right? So everything that we've put here so far is going to need to end up going inside of this home file in the end. So let's go ahead and create it real quick. So inside this home folder, right click on it and click on new file, and then type in home.dart. Once this opens up, we'll have just a blank Dart file, basically. And then we'll want to take what we have here and then drop it right there. And VS Code makes it really easy for us to do this by clicking on this little light bulb after clicking on scaffold. It gives us a few options, and we'll use a lot of these as we continue to go on, but for now we're going to use this thing that says extract widget. And all that's going to do when we click on it is it's going to ask us for a name for the widget, and I'm just going to call this home with a capital H. After I do that, notice that everything kind of splits up after that, and how now we're left with just this little home widget, and then all of our code from before is now right here. So what this lets us do is that now we can just take this and then just cut this off, or cut this from this page, and then go over to this home page and paste it in. Now we're going to get some errors because we need to do a little bit of importing. So if we hover over any one of those errors and we go to quick fix, we're going to go ahead and import the library package flutter/material.dart, and that would go on basically any page regardless. So if we save this page and then save this one as well, and then the other thing we'll have to do is we'll have to import home as well. So you should see some red squiggly lines underneath home. If you click on quick fix again, it should just say import, and then we can just import this screen basically. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now if I save this, nothing really shows up for now. Let's go ahead and add some text just to make sure we know this has worked. So at the very top of my column, going back to the home.dart file, I'm going to go ahead and type in, create a text widget. I'm just going to say, this is my home page. And then put a comma at the end of this parentheses. So this is how you add some text if you don't recall. You just put in the word text in caps, and then you specify what you want to have your text be in some quotation marks as a string. Now if I save this, you should see it show up all the way in the very top left. It's a little small. It's probably difficult to see on my screen, but you should see it in the very top left, possibly being covered by this little area right there. So that's our home page. Again, let me see if I can figure out how to get this to show up. If not this time, then I'll make sure it shows up eventually, after starting in the next lesson, because it definitely should be showing up here. I suppose I can try to fix it by showing you the other way of importing an image as well, which is starting with using image and then dot asset, which is another way of importing this. And then we'll specify the same exact way. And as I'm saying this, I now completely recall what's the issue now in terms of why that picture is not showing up. And I'm about to show it to you after I finish typing this in. So assets, and then slash travel_home.png. If I save that, nothing should show up necessarily, but if I go down to this file called pubspec.yaml, which is in your root folder, and this is a really important place for your entire app. And the reason why is because this actually lets you import a lot of useful things, such as packages and then other things. And packages are basically ways to take what other people have done and use them in your app. And this could include anything from using your camera on your phone and possibly just getting little snippets of code, like a slidable card, basically. So what we'll need to do is go down in this pubspec.yaml file and go down to this part that says assets. So we'll need to add assets, basically, and images and stuff. You have to specify them in this file. So we'll have to go ahead and first off undo this quotes, basically, by doing control and then backslash, basically, or it's been commented out essentially. So if we go, once we do that, we then have to specify what we want to have as our assets. You just put it next to this dash, basically. So in our case, a really easy way for bringing in all of our assets is just by doing assets, because that's the folder that's in our root directory, and then do a backslash. We're going to go ahead and put in everything right now. So we'll put in assets slash travel_home.png. Now if I save this, and probably have to do a hot reload here as well. It finally shows up, and that's how you basically put images into your Flutter project. You first have to specify them underneath assets in your pubspec.yaml file. The other thing that we might as well do as well, just to make sure we have them at ready, is to bring in this flags folder as well. So if we press enter underneath this and do assets again, slash, and then we're just going to do flags and then slash as well. And what that'll do is that now it'll allow us to access all of these flag PNGs inside the flags folder just by adding this backslash at the end. Now if I save this, nothing will necessarily happen because we haven't used it, but now we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and X this out. And now we might as well continue on the rest of the home app, of the home screen. So I'm going to delete that text I put down earlier. And then I'll do a little reload. So let's go ahead and go back to what we were doing before, which is adding in this visits sort of area right here of the screen, which happens underneath the picture. So to begin, just pull up my we're going to first off work on creating a little column, basically. Or starting off, we can see that it's being surrounded by some padding, right? We can worry about the padding afterwards, but what we notice first is that we have a row, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put a comma here in my column on my home screen, and let's create a row now. And a row will have some children. I'm going to go ahead and click escape on that and type in children. And then I'm going to open up these brackets as well. So remember, the children for a row are going left to right, basically, in order. So looking at this, we notice that we have the countries visited and then 12 underneath that, right? But instead of, well, let's go ahead and make one of these, and then we'll see what we can do after that to make our lives a little easier rather than repeating code. So looking at what we have here, we notice that this is going to be a little column, right, of a title followed by a number. So that means we're going to need a column. I'm going to open up those parentheses, and then this column will again have children. I'm going to open that up again as well. So looking at this column, we want first some text on top underneath that, and then we're going to have more text underneath that as well. So a good way to make sure that we don't run into an issue where we have some text that's going to basically run too long lengthways, and we want to make sure that we get our text showing up one on top of the other, right? The word countries visited is basically wrapped, right? An easy way to wrap text is by putting it inside a container. And you can always do this afterwards if you figure out that, hey, I actually want to wrap this text instead of letting it keep running on. And you can do that by just clicking on this, and then you should have an option for wrapping it with a widget. And then after that, you can specify a container. So for this, we're going to have to specify a child, which we're going to have as text for this container. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And then this text is first going to be countries visited. So I'm going to write down countries visited. And then I'm going to go ahead and save that and see what we have. You can see that some text that just says countries visited has showed up in the top left-hand corner. It doesn't look great right now, but obviously we're going to edit it and make it look a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead and put a comment at the end of that, and we're going to use a few more of the text properties. So if we hover over text, we see a bunch of its properties show up. And you can obviously look at the docs and figure out what all of these mean and play around with them on your own. But the ones that we're going to be wanting to use first off is going to be this text align. We want to make our text centered, right? So we're going to use text align, then text align.center. So this is going to first off center our text, and this is going to be important once we wrap it, because we don't want the text to be all the way to the left, we want it to be centered. And then after that, we're going to style this text. And text has a style property that we're going to use anytime you want to style it. So you're just going to write down the word style, followed by a colon. And then text style expects a text style widget. So we're going to say text style as its widget. Now, text style has a ton of also very useful properties. We have things like its font size, its background color, its font style as well, the letter spacing, shadows, all of it. And so this gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want your text to look, basically. So we're going to go ahead and start off by first off making this font size instead increased. Let's make it 20. And obviously when you're doing this on your own, you're going to play around with it. You might make it 18 or something, figure out it's too small, increase it to 20, and you'll have a lot of flexibility to play around with it. So we'll make this 20, and then the font weight. And then after you write font weight, you put a colon again, and a font weight expects a font weight widget. So then we're going to put font weight. And then you notice a lot of things pop up after you type in font weight. So it gives you different weights, and you can look at Google Fonts as well, and you can see an example of all of these, what they actually look like. Basically, it goes increments by 100, going from smallest or the lightest to the boldest, basically. And we're going to go ahead and just click on font weight.bold, which is basically W600 for just a point of reference. So if we save this, we notice that now countries visited has gotten a lot bigger, and it looks a lot better now than before. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of padding, because obviously we don't want this to be all the way in the top left-hand corner. And this is really easy to do. Anytime you're working on something and you realize, you know, I actually wanted to put some padding around that because this doesn't look as great as it was before. So we want to put padding basically around this entire row, and we can do that by just clicking on this row right here. And then if I scroll all the way to the left, you see the yellow light bulb show up. And then when you click on it, we have a few options, and one of them is actually wrap with padding. So if I click on that, then we have a padding widget show up. Right now it's set to edge insets all 8. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this 26 instead, 26.0. Because I feel like using the number 26, and that's how it is a lot of the times, that you just kind of go with what you feel might look nice, and you just kind of guess and check anytime you're messing with how much space you want around. So 26 is the number of pixels we have from the top and from its sides and all around. So that's what edge insets all means. It means that how many pixels we want on all sides of this row. In this case, it's 26. So the very next thing we're going to do is now we're going to add in the second piece of text, right? Well, first let's make sure this gets wrapped as well. So to wrap this, we just have to specify a width in terms of pixels for this container right here that wraps around this text. And let's decide on just putting it at 100 and see what that looks like. So if we save this, you notice that now it's been wrapped. So now we have countries over visited. So anytime you want to wrap text, all you have to do is put a container around it. So make the child of this container your text, and then specify a width, and that will automatically wrap the text to fit whatever the width is for that container. So after we've done that, we want to put some text underneath that as well. So if we go ahead and click on this, we notice that the text is a little bit spaced underneath that, and a really easy way to do that, especially since we're working in a column, is underneath this container, we're going to go ahead and put a sized box. So a sized box is just a really easy way to put some spacing between. So and all it is just an empty box that doesn't have anything inside it, that you specify a width or a height in terms of how much spacing. So we're going to put in the height. We're going to make it 18 pixels. And that's just going to add 18 pixels underneath this right here. And after that, we are going to specify our text. And the text is going to be a bit bigger than the countries visited title, and then it's also going to be blue and bold. So let's go ahead and start by typing in the number, which is going to be 12. And then after that, we're going to put a comma and then the word style, because we're going to style this text, right, with text style again. And then in parentheses, let me open these up because we're going to add a few things. We're going to want to first change the font size. Let's make it 30. And then put a comma down, and then we're going to change the font weight. And again, we're going to use font weight.bold. And then after that, we put another comma, and we're going to then just change the color. I'm going to make the color, and then Flutter makes it really easy for us to use colors as well. If we hover over color, you notice that there's a color widget. And if we put down colors, and we put a period after that, you see that all of these colors show up basically. And then not only that, but each of these colors also come with their own accents by specifying in brackets after that. We'll go over that later. So we'll use blue for now. And then after we do that, let's go ahead and save this and see what showed up. And then just like that, we see that the text now looks exactly how it is on our screenshot here. Fantastic. And that wasn't too hard either. All it took is just some texts and some containers and then a size box in between it. And then from there, we got a pretty good looking piece of imagery right there. So like I was saying, we noticed that we have 3 of the exact same thing right here, right? So rather than having to copy and paste this code 3 times and then editing it, which you can definitely do, but you would obviously get a really big file size, we're going to go ahead and modularize this code. And this is going to be the last thing we'll do today. So to do that, we're going to do what we did earlier, which is to go ahead and extract the widget. So we're going to go ahead and extract what we had just created, this little column right here, part of this row. So we're going to go ahead and hover over this and then click on this light bulb. And then we're going to go ahead and click on extract widget. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and call this a visits item. Or even before we do that too. Also notice that this is all just in our home page, right? And this home page is getting a little bit cluttered now if you look at it. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to extract this whole thing, starting that we have placed, this part right here, starting all the way from this padding. And we're going to go ahead and make that its own file, and we're going to call it visit.dart. Visits.dart basically. So we're going to right click on home. We're going to create a file. We're going to call it visits, or even better than that. The other thing we want to do is, because this is a home folder, we don't want to just drop everything inside it because then we might get confused about what's the screen. We're going to create another folder inside the home folder called components. And that's just going to be the little bits that are a part of this home page basically. So inside this components folder, we're going to create a file called visits.dart. And then we're going to go ahead and extract what we have here, starting from this padding widget underneath the image. I'm going to click on that and click on extract widget. I'm going to say visits. And after we do that, this is how much more cleaner the home page is now gotten. And then we can go ahead and just cut this out from this file and put it into our new file. And again, we're going to have a lot of squiggly lines because we have to quickly import material.dart. So if we right click on or hover over this, go to quick fix, we just import material.dart and all those errors go away. And if we save both of these and then also import visits, so import library, and now everything's the same, but now our home.dart file is a lot cleaner and everything that has to do with visits is now in its own little file. So again, let's quickly extract this column right here so we can kind of modulize our code. So we're going to extract this and call it visits item. Now we have a little visits item widget right here that contains everything we want. So now it comes time to how do we change basically what's being displayed now for each one of these. Because if we copy visits item 3 times now, visits item, visits item, and save this, we now have all of what we've created now here 3 times in a row. Obviously, we'll have to change the title and the number so it actually matches with what we have here. And we can do that in just a second. First off, let's properly space this by changing the rows to the row spacing of its main axis alignment. So this is how you change its horizontal spacing between each item. We're going to go ahead and put main axis alignment. We're going to do dot space between and put a comma at the end of it. After we save this, everything is now spaced really nicely and very well spaced between. So that's what space between does. It spaces everything evenly on both sides between each other. So going into this, let's figure out, so to basically bring in some data from here into this widget basically, so we can change it really easily, we're going to create some variables. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and delete this part right here, or let me make sure I don't delete the wrong parts. So yes, we're going to go ahead and delete this right here. We're going to get some errors showing up in a sec, but all we're going to do is we're going to create some variables that correspond with the title and the number. And all we're going to do is we're going to say final, and final means it can no longer be changed, which is an important part. You have to make these final. A final string, and then title. What that'll do is that'll just create a variable for us to play around with, and then do another one, final int number. Then after we've done that, we also have to make it so anytime someone creates a new visits object, we give them the option of passing some parameters into this, inside these parentheses. And we can do that by doing visits item, by typing out what we have here. And essentially, it's almost like creating a build function. So for this class right here. So we can say this.title and then this.number. And what this does is it creates named parameters so that by basically specifying the title and the number, you'll pass it into this widget right here. And to see how that works, let's go ahead and go inside these parentheses right here. And we also have a little error right here because we need a semicolon at the end of this statement right here. So if we go inside visits item and we start typing title, you'll notice that now it notices, hey, there's a title property that we specified down here that we're able to specify. So we're going to go ahead and say countries visited. And then we put a comma, and then we'll be able to also specify a number. We're going to go ahead and say 12. So now that we have that, it doesn't really do anything because we're not using this data. So how do we use these variables that we've created down below now? So it's actually really easy because now all we have to do is, instead of putting down exactly what we want, which is countries visited, we can we can backspace this and put down this variable we created, which is title right here. So that's really cool. Now we're able to pass in some data from here, the countries visited title. We can pass it into this visits item widget right here. So then now after we do that and then change this 12, instead of being 12, we make it number, which is that variable we had. Once it goes away. Oh, and then it has to be number because text only takes strings. So we're going to do number.to and then string as a method. And some parentheses. And then just like that, if we press save, we're going to get some errors obviously because we don't have anything specified. But if I go ahead and copy what I put here and paste it in both of these and save, we now have exactly what we had before, only now we're able to change what's going to be displayed by simply changing what these values are equal to. So what we've done is we really modularized our code so that instead of making this code and having to hard code just a title and a number, and then having to copy all this code 3 times just because those are different, we're able to have its own little widget and change what the title and number is by specifying it right here. And you can see how much easier and how much cleaner that looks rather than copying and pasting that 3 times over. And it's quite dramatic, really, and how much easier that is. So let's go ahead and finish this up, and then we'll be done for today. So we want to visit, and then 20. And then change this to 20. And then the last one, which is total countries, and then 251. Let's go ahead and save that. And then just like that, we now have a mirror image to what we had on our screenshot. And you can see how easy that was in terms of, well, not necessarily easy, but you can see how much simpler that is compared to if we had to rewrite that whole thing 3 times. And that's a really good way of not just coding in Flutter, but anytime you have 3 things that essentially function the same way and are next to each other or in any way, you want to modularize your code so that you can put in whatever you want as your title and your number, and you can specify that somewhere else. You kind of create a barrier of abstraction here. The visits item will build this widget right here, this whole little box, based on the title you give it and the number as well. So that's it for today. I hope you guys really enjoyed. Go ahead and click on stop once you're ready to go, but we've made a decent bit of progress, and we'll keep moving forward in the next lesson starting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll see you there. Bye.